Welcome back. Are you a track junkie like me and get annoyed when your car beeps and throws error messages about your pads being worn out and needing to be replaced? Well, if so, I'm going to show you how to create a defeat dongle, or whatever you want to call it, to make your car shut up and think that it has good pads on it. It's really easy. A quick disclaimer though, you should use the sensors if your pads come with them. This is really for people who track their car and constantly run track pads and are tired of the car complaining about it every time you fire it up. So here's what you'll need to do this. You'll need old OEM pads where you can grab the sensors off of them. Well, it's really just the cable and the connector. Heat shrink tube and a heat gun or a lighter, or electrical tape if you must. A soldering iron, solder, and flux, or you can just twist the wires together if you must. And a multimeter couldn't hurt to confirm that your car uses continuity to test the pad wear, and also to test a completed dongle. Cable ties and something to cut them with, and last but not least, wire strippers. Or you can use side cutters or your teeth if you're an OG electrical wizard like me. Just kidding. Most cars check their brake pads by checking continuity. The pad material ends up being a part of the circuit, and so when the pad wears down far enough, it breaks the wires off of the pad, and then you end up with an open circuit, and it's no longer complete, so that causes the ECU to throw a code about your brake pads being worn out. So it means it's really easy to trick the ECU. All we have to do is take one of the sensor cables off of one of your old pads, strip the wires, solder them together, and then plug the connector back into the other end on your caliper. So you'll need to make one of these for as many sensors that your car has, so hopefully there aren't any cars out there that have one at each corner. Mine only has one at the front left and the right rear, and the current track pads I have actually came with a sensor for one of the front ones, so really I only need to make one for the right rear. First, I'll show you how to check continuity with your multimeter. You can literally do this with that free multimeter that you can get from Harbor Freight with a coupon. With one like that where it has ranges, you just select the lowest resistance range. And if you don't know how to set your multimeter to resistance, it's usually marked with the omega symbol, which is basically that horseshoe shaped thing if you don't know your Greek alphabet. If you touch the leads together, it'll read something really low, like, I don't know, anywhere from 5 down to 0.3 or something like that. Just means there's almost no resistance at all. And that's, about the same as, like what a copper wire would read. Usually very well below 1, we'll put it that way. So that's actually pretty close to what a brake pad should read if you touch the 2 pins inside of the connector with your multimeter. However, most people have modern auto-ranging multimeters, so I'll show you how to check with one of those. So you set it to resistance measurement mode. Most auto-ranging multimeters also have a continuity check mode, which is even better, but it's not required. If it has that, you'll usually see like a speaker icon or like a sound wave icon, which also kind of looks like the Wi-Fi icon, I guess. It just beeps when you have continuity, so then you don't have to look at your multimeter, and it's pretty handy. So if you don't have that, you'll just look at the resistance number on the screen, just like you would with the Harbor Freight one. So a good pad, will read usually less than 1 ohm. So we begin by cutting the sensor wire off of the old pad, remove the protective tube if it came with one, and trim it down so we have access to the wires inside. You'll want to use wire strippers to strip the 2 wires. If you don't have a soldering iron, this is the part where you just basically strip them a little bit longer and then just twist them really, really well, like twist them together really well, so that way they won't come apart. And then you can kind of ball it up or do something to make it smaller so you don't have the really long amount of exposed wire, because you're going to eventually need to cover it with heat shrink tube or electrical tape. If you do have a soldering iron, go ahead and heat it up, and then you'll dip the wires into flux, or use a flux pen or applicator if you have one. And it's really required because it's acidic and it cleans the surfaces, so then you get really good fusion. If you don't, you might get a cold solder joint, and that might break loose later. So basically, heat up some solder, get a good blob going, and then apply it across the wires. And if it's hot enough, you might have to hold your soldering iron tip on the wires to get it hot, but once it gets to that point, you should see it flow across it if you applied flux and did everything correctly. Let it cool off for a minute or two. You'll want to bend the wire pair back so we can get a snug fit with a heat shrink tube, but this really depends on the size of the heat shrink tube that you're using. Trim the heat shrink tube to the right length, then you fire up your heat gun, and then you get the tube to shrink. And then if you don't have a heat gun, you can actually just use a Bic lighter. Just don't put the heat or the flame underneath it. Put the flame to the side, close enough so the heat from the flame heats your heat shrink tube, and then it's pretty easy to get the heat shrink tube to shrink that way. Just don't get it too close, because then you'll actually catch the heat shrink tube on fire. Yeah, if you don't have heat shrink tube, you can probably get away with just using electrical tape. I hate electrical tape. It just gets gummed up after a while, and then it comes loose, and then it just leaves a messy residue on everything. So you can use it if you need to, but I would use heat shrink tube because you can buy that anywhere, even Walmart or Harbor Freight. In most cases, your little new dongle will be too long, and then you'll risk it hitting the inside of your rim or even the rotor. So you'll want to fold it up and cable tie it. Ask me how I know. And after you cable tie it, obviously trim the end of the cable tie. If you have a lift, the next part's super easy. If not, you can just use ramps or floor jack and jack stands. If you have a lift, you just lift it up and then you can hook the connector up from the back of the wheel. If you use a jack stand, you'll probably want to just pull the wheel off, and then you'll get easier access to the back of the caliper where the connector is. In my case, I used an extra cable tie just to make sure the connector doesn't come apart or come loose, because I don't think I have any extra used pads laying around, so if I lost this, then I would have to buy new pads to cut one of the cables off to make another defeat dongle. But anyway, that's it. It's completely done. Now your car won't complain about replacing pads. But if your car has 2 or even 4 sensors, you'll need to repeat this process and make one for any corner that requires a sensor. So if you don't have old pads that you can harvest the sensor cables off of, you can always check with friends, local Facebook car groups, Craigslist, eBay, and whatnot for old used pads. And if you can't find any used ones that you can harvest them off of, and this, the beeping and error messages bug you enough, I guess you could technically see where, if you could find the cheapest set of OEM pads, and then buy some and then just harvest the cables off of them. But hope this was helpful to you. I'm going to enjoy the car not beeping at me anymore because Audi's beep is so loud I can literally hear it with the exhaust valves open, windows down, helmet on, going full tilt on the track. So hearing that every time I start the car is extremely annoying, loud, and startling. So yeah, but I'll see you in the next video.